Hello, it's me, Christine. Welcome to my little crime corner. I feel like we were just in Washington State, but we are here again to meet a young woman named Mackenzie Cowell. Mackenzie Cowell was a 17-year-old student at Wenatchee High School in Orondo, Washington. She had a tight-knit friend group and was an active member of her school's dance team, the Applettes. She was in her senior year and deciding which direction she wanted her life to go. She had previously done some work as a model, but always had a passion for makeup and hair, so she enrolled in cosmetology school at the Wenatchee Academy of Hair Design in downtown Wenatchee to take some classes while she was still attending her high school. February 9th, 2010 was just a regular day for her. She woke up, did her morning routine, and spent her day at school. Unfortunately, this day would take a fateful turn. Just after 3 p.m., her classmates at the Hair Academy said she told them that she was going to run out real quick and would be back in less than 15 minutes. One student said that she told them she was just going out back to the parking lot to visit with some guys from Tacoma to make some plans for later that evening. Security footage from the hair school shows Mackenzie leaving the building, walking to her car, and driving away. She did not meet or talk to anyone in the parking lot. Around this time, Mackenzie had texted her boyfriend, "Hey, what's up?" He then responded back, "Hey," and did not get a reply after that. This was the last time she was known to have used her phone. Around 5:40 p.m., Mackenzie's dad, Reed, had tried to reach her several times, but kept getting sent straight to voicemail. Her family was expecting her home, and when 8 o'clock rolled around, they were extremely worried. She had had this set curfew during school nights, and she never came home late. It was also unusual that she was not reachable by phone, as she was typically good about being responsive, especially with her family. Later that night, around 7:45, Reed got a call from the local police. The officer said that someone in Mission Ridge, a remote area nearly an hour from Wenatchee, called them to report a seemingly abandoned vehicle in his driveway. All of the car's doors were locked. They had traced the car's registration, and it led them to Reed. Reed then informed them that his daughter Mackenzie was missing. While searching the car, police found Mackenzie's purse still inside, although her debit card and cell phone were missing. There were also some of her clothes found in the back. It is unclear, though, if it is what she was wearing earlier that day. Police were only able to identify one pair of footprints at the scene. This certainly concerned Mackenzie's family more, as well as the police, and they immediately began their search. They used helicopters to search around the area where Mackenzie's car was found and issued search warrants for Mackenzie's phone records, as well as social media activity. They were hopeful that something of use would turn up in these searches, such as a person she was talking to, or maybe someone she had made plans to meet up with. Anything that would have given them a reasonable explanation as to why her car had been found so far from home. They knew this was likely an unexpected destination, as she had made a point to tell her classmates at the beauty school that she would be back in less than 15 minutes. Why would she say that and then drive almost an hour and park in this remote area? The local sheriff had requested the FBI to aid in their investigation early on, as he felt that time was of the essence. 4 days later, on February 13th, a passerby had called police around midday to report that they had found a body on the banks of the Columbia River at a resort community about 20 miles southeast of Wenatchee. When police arrived, they discovered the body of a young woman who was fully clothed, and her feet were submerged in the water. There was nothing in the area to indicate how she had gotten there or what she might have been doing there. There was a vacant house about 150 feet from where she was found, but a search of the house did not lead investigators to believe anything having to do with this deceased young woman had taken place inside that house. There was a piece of duct tape found near the scene that was collected by investigators for testing. They were hoping that it held the DNA of the perpetrator. She was taken to a hospital where an autopsy was to be performed. Testing concluded that this was in fact Mackenzie Cowell. She was still wearing her beauty school uniform. During her autopsy, the medical examiner determined that her cause of death was due to strangulation. There was no evidence that Mackenzie had been sexually assaulted, but a brutal attack had certainly taken place. There was evidence that she had suffered blunt force trauma to her head, and there were several stab wounds to her upper back and neck. The killer had attempted to cut off one of her arms post-mortem. A kitchen knife was actually found, still stuck in her shoulder. This is such a heinous and deeply troubling thing to do to someone. Just so violent and apparent that the killer went out of their way to be vicious. Because of the dismemberment attempt, investigators assumed this was the killer intentionally trying to make her unidentifiable by removing her hand and thus the fingerprints, but was unable to. This usually points to the victim possibly knowing their attacker. A memorial service was held for Mackenzie on February 25th, and more than 1,800 people came to pay respects. Very shortly after the memorial service, the investigation resumed. After Mackenzie's discovery, a task force was put together made up of local law enforcement, FBI agents, and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers. This operation quickly became one of the largest multi-agency investigations in the area since an attempted serial bombing in 1997. There was no shortage of suspects, and the police interviewed more than 800 people over the course of the investigation. Their first suspect was Mackenzie's boyfriend, Joaquin Villasano, as well as his mother, Joey. We know that according to the phone records, Joaquin was the last person who Mackenzie texted, so it makes sense that the last person to have some sort of contact with her would be at the top of police's radar. Joaquin insisted that he had no knowledge about what happened to Mackenzie and had nothing to do with it. However, when taking a polygraph test, he was asked if he knew what happened to Mackenzie. He said no, and the lie detector test had determined that that was a lie. It was revealed that Joaquin's mother, Joey, had gotten in an argument with Mackenzie the day before she went missing, but they didn't have any insight as to what the argument was about, and Joey wasn't talking. Not long after the failed polygraph test and the argument allegation, both Joaquin and Joey were completely cleared by police. Douglas County Superior Judge John Hotchkiss and Commissioner Judith McCauley had granted multiple requests for search warrants in the case and had approved multiple police requests to seal warrants and affidavits, which would effectively hide them from public view. This was done in order to not compromise the investigation, as the police were overwhelmed with people coming forward with intentional and unintentional false tips, and people kept trying to get close with the investigation that had no affiliation with it. On April 5th, police were contacted by an officer from a Western Washington drug task force. The officer said they had an informant who had information on Mackenzie's case. The informant's name was Liz Reed. Liz had a record of drug convictions, the most recent of which dated to 2005. She had gained the trust of the police department after submitting several tips that assisted the Drug Enforcement Administration in investigating 4 different narcotics trafficking groups and the Federal Drug Agency had independently corroborated all of the information supplied to them by Liz. There was no reason not to trust the information she was giving them, as she had not led them astray thus far and had nothing to gain by lying. She gave detectives the names of 2 Wenatchee Valley men, one in his 20s and one in his 30s, who she claimed had admitted to killing Mackenzie in her presence. Liz had alleged that 2 drug dealers, Sam Cuevas and Emmanuel Cerros, had killed Mackenzie because they thought she was a police informant. She said the murder had occurred as a result of mistaken identity. Liz claimed to have seen a snuff film of the murder and that Sam had blatantly said, "I had choked that bitch to shut her up." She reported that there were 4 men involved with abducting Mackenzie, and 3 of them were named in investigators' affidavits. The 4th man was unknown. According to Liz, one of the men had approached Mackenzie in her car to distract her, while another man forced his way into her car. The other 2 men followed in a green Jeep Cherokee. Liz claimed that 2 of these men had carried out the murder and had given graphic and descriptive details in which she described a strangulation as well as a stab wound to the victim's throat. This was not necessarily a bombshell, as the details surrounding Mackenzie's cause of death had already been widely reported, much to the dismay of the police department, who had asked newspapers to not publish these details, notably that she had died of manual strangulation and that there was a stab wound to her neck, as they felt this would affect their case. The medical examiner had determined that Mackenzie had suffered a blow to the head, and Liz had not mentioned this at all, although it had been published along with other details in the newspaper several months prior. Based on Liz's story about the men following Mackenzie in the Jeep, police began focusing their efforts there. Not long after, investigators discovered that the green Jeep that had been thought to have been involved in the murder was up for sale, and an undercover task force had sent an officer to make the purchase. It is unclear what amount was paid, but it was turned over to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab in nearby Cheney for testing. They were hopeful that they'd be able to uncover anything connecting these men to Mackenzie's murder. One of the main reasons that police were eager to come into possession of this Jeep was that Liz had alleged that the owner had asked for help locating a piece of jewelry that was thought to have been left in the vehicle. She alleged that he said, "We lost a ring from that night." The ring in question was believed to have belonged to Mackenzie and was thought to have been worn by her on that day. A few weeks later, Liz then claimed that she was to go to a remote location to retrieve this ring. This information was forwarded to investigators, and on April 20th, they went to the location and found a small silver ring partially buried in the soil. The ring was bagged up and sent to the lab for testing. The ring, which was described as a dangle ring, appeared to be similar to one seen worn by Mackenzie on her left hand in a photo that was found on her digital camera. Although it was said to have looked similar, there was no conclusive proof that this ring was owned or worn by Mackenzie. The ring did not match the descriptions of 2 rings that were thought to have been worn by Mackenzie on the day she disappeared. It should be noted that as she was found, no jewelry was found with her body. After hearing this information, one of Mackenzie's classmates said that the dangle ring did not sound familiar to them and that they don't remember her wearing it. They said, "I don't know, she had a ton of jewelry. She never wore the same thing twice." So this was helpful, or unhelpful, depending on who you ask. Police showed the ring to Mackenzie's family members, and no one recognized the ring, and none of them believed that it was owned by Mackenzie. On April 27th, police were granted warrants to phone calls between their informant and the suspects, and on at least one call that was recorded that day, Liz and one of the suspects had discussed the ring. When Liz claimed to have the ring, the suspect asked how much she wanted for it. So it's clear that this ring was believed to have been worn by Mackenzie, and the suspects believed it would connect them to the crime. After finding out the older suspect had been arrested on a drug possession charge on April 25th, Liz had asked over the phone if he was arrested for killing another girl, to which he answered no and explained the drug arrest. The wiretap period extended to May 18th, as investigators were hopeful that the suspects would reveal more information. After a few brief calls that yielded very little information, Liz had claimed she began receiving threatening text messages from one of the suspects. The wiretap stopped after June 15th, with nothing new being revealed after several weeks. Both of these suspects ended up being arrested later that month on charges unrelated to Mackenzie's murder and were both subsequently convicted. While working with the task force, Liz had received several payments. A dollar amount was not given in their documents, but the task force had agreed to provide up to $4,000 for information on the suspects' activities and their whereabouts. As promising as Liz's leads had been in the beginning, and the great lengths that investigators went to follow up with her claims, they proved to be not as compelling as they seemed and did not result in any arrests or charges, and the police felt that Liz had misled their investigation. Liz's credibility was then brought into question as she later retracted her claim that she had seen a video of the murder. After bringing in Sam and Emmanuel for questioning, both men were able to provide solid alibis for the time of Mackenzie's murder, and phone records backed up their claims. I think it's interesting that Liz was never looked into as a suspect, as she's the one that came forward with these claims. It is unclear if this was a ploy to get attention or get some type of revenge against Sam and Emmanuel, but the whole situation is just very odd to me. I find it very malicious to come forward with a false accusation or to come up with a story and have it go as far as this, which must have been so hard on Mackenzie's family. Police then looked into a 29-year-old man named Christopher Scott Wilson after receiving several tips, including one from a frequent tipster who had called in many times over the years, offering up information to police about various crimes. Police felt this was a promising lead, as Christopher was also a student at the Hare Academy and was a classmate of Mackenzie's. Police were prompted to investigate him after getting a letter in August from a man named Theo Keys, who was a former friend of Christopher, claiming that Christopher had an obsession with death, dead bodies, and serial killers. One of his classmates had reported to police that he heard Christopher say he used to work at funeral homes and that he liked to cut people up. Theo also said he recalls Christopher choking a female friend at a party and then releasing her as if nothing happened. A month later, on October 6th, police arrested Christopher on suspicion of second-degree murder. His bail was set at $1 million. Christopher voluntarily provided a DNA sample, which was found to be consistent with the male DNA profile found on the duct tape that was discovered near Mackenzie's body. His DNA was not found in Mackenzie's car, and Mackenzie's DNA was not found in Christopher's car. It was revealed that after talking to other students at the Academy of Hair Design, as well as seen on security footage, that Christopher was seen leaving the hair school just 72 seconds after Mackenzie left on the day of her disappearance. 3 witnesses from the Mission Ridge area had reported that they had seen a man matching Christopher's description around the area where Mackenzie's car had been found abandoned. Police obtained a search warrant to search Christopher's apartment, where they found traces of blood and, when tested, came up as a match for Mackenzie. 2 months later, in December, Christopher's friend Tessa Schulman was arrested. Some reports describe her as being his girlfriend. Some reports say that she was just a friend. Tessa was suspected as playing a part in the crime. At the very least, she was suspected of helping Christopher in concealing the crime. Detectives claimed to have found many photos on Christopher's computer of Tessa, and I'm using the words as described by investigators, posing as a dead person on the floor of Christopher's apartment in the spot where Mackenzie's blood was found. Tessa later claimed that she had only posed like that there because Christopher had told her to, and she had no idea that Mackenzie's blood had been found there. I don't know about you, but I find this absolutely disgusting, and I don't see how he can talk his way out of this one. Phone records had shown that Christopher had been in regular contact with Tessa throughout the afternoon, and Tessa was in regular contact with her boyfriend that day. Tessa had allegedly called her boyfriend in a panic that night, saying, "Something really, really bad has happened." Tessa ended up never being charged with anything related to Mackenzie, but was later charged with obstruction of justice for an unrelated case. Videos were also discovered involving Christopher and Tessa, where a blood-stained carpet was shown. Christopher could be heard on video saying, "Does it look clean here?" Tessa could be heard saying, "Clean for considering what's happening? Yes, I think it's clean here." The video zoomed in on a stained patch of carpet, and when asked, Christopher claimed that it was soiled during a party. A patch of the carpet was collected and sent to the lab, and when compared, was a match for Mackenzie. The trial began in April 2011. Prosecutors upgraded Christopher's charge from second-degree to first-degree murder, stating that this crime was premeditated. If convicted, he could be sentenced to 20 to 26 years in prison. Before the trial began, Christopher was offered a plea deal in exchange for pleading guilty to first-degree manslaughter. His sentence would be lowered to 6.5 years. He rejected this plea. Christopher's defense team was led by John Henry Brown, and if this name sounds familiar, it is. You may remember him as representing Ted Bundy. His defense had argued that Mackenzie's blood had been planted in Christopher's apartment. According to John Brown, he said that significantly more blood should have been found if a murder had taken place there. The judge ruled that the defense would be allowed to present evidence that would implicate Sam Cuevas and Emmanuel Cerros as the killers. If you recall, these were the men that Liz had named in her initial statement. It was also ruled that the prosecution could not bring up Christopher's previous work history in the funeral homes, his Hannibal Lecter tattoo, or his online activity in serial killer forums. In May 2012, after the jury selection had begun, a new plea deal was offered, and this time, Christopher accepted. The terms of the plea deal included him signing a document saying he had caused the death of Mackenzie Cowell. He pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter for Mackenzie's death, as well as first-degree robbery for taking Mackenzie's cell phone, and second-degree assault for an unrelated case. For this, he was sentenced to 14 years and 3 months in prison. Christopher has maintained his innocence and later stated that he only took the guilty plea because he thought he would not receive a fair trial. According to statements made by Christopher, He claimed that around 80% of juror candidates had participated in questionnaires and had answered questions that they agreed that Christopher was guilty, or that they had knowledge of evidence which was ordered to be suppressed at the trial. I don't know where he came up with this figure or how he could have possibly known this. The whole point of jury selection is to avoid having people on the jury with preconceived opinions of the case, and the details aren't released until you're selected. So even though it was high profile to an extent, being that the case details had been discussed and portrayed in the media, a person would not have been knowingly selected if they were blatantly deciding on a person's guilt. Honestly, if they were, they would keep this to themselves, as this is a quick way to get yourself dismissed. Jury selection questions are deliberately vague in order to keep some form of unbiasedness. Christopher had filed a motion to dismiss his guilty plea, but the court had quickly rejected this. He was imprisoned at Lark Correction Center in Yakult, Washington, which, as of October 12th, 2023, has been permanently closed. Christopher was released from the Monroe Correctional Center in December 2023 after serving just 11 and a half years of his sentence. I believe this was because he got credit for time served when he had spent 19 months in custody prior to the trial. This case was just so tragic, and the way at which it unfolded is just heartbreaking. The consequences do not match the crime, in my opinion, considering this was determined as being premeditated, and I don't feel that justice was served to its full extent. I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this one. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.